Ever catch yourself thinking about like what connects us? I mean, not just to each other, but to, something bigger. Today's deep dive, we're going deep on dignity, empathy, and trust. We're going to explore how these ideas shape how we relate to each other and maybe even to something, well, kind of profound. And get this, all these insights, we're pulling them from one single source, an excerpt on thickshades.com. It's got all these reflections on how dignity ties into faith, what real empathy actually is, even how those can like impact our relationship with, a higher power.
Wild, right?
Pretty mind-blowing stuff.
Totally. So to kick us off, this excerpt states, dignity is crucial to understand that every person is made in the image of God. Like unpacking that, what's that even mean in today's world?
It's about inherent worth.
Yeah.
The excerpt uses this idea, imago Dei. So like imagine every single person, they've got this spark of the divine in them. And this isn't some like abstract theological concept. This changes how we see people, how we treat each other. It makes you think about how we treat each other, especially with how the excerpt warns about societies that forget this and like fall apart.
Yeah, it's like when we forget that, things kind of go downhill. History shows us what happens when we don't value each other's dignity. Like take the Holocaust, right? A whole group of people just dehumanized. It's a scary reminder of what happens when we don't see that spark in each other, even when it's hard.
It makes you realize these aren't just ideas, There are actual consequences for how we treat each other.
100%. And it's not just those huge, horrible events. It's the everyday stuff, too. Like when we dismiss someone because of their background or their beliefs. Yeah. It's a slippery slope,
It really is. It makes you wonder, like, on a personal level, how do we stop that from happening? How do we, like, encourage more dignity?
The excerpt, it seems to say empathy is key. It says, true empathy does not require grand speeches or perfect words.
Interesting.
Right. So if it's not about, like, being a good talker, what does real empathy even look like?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. We've all heard that saying, walk a mile in their shoes. But is that really all there is to it?
I think there's more to it. The excerpt, it talks about feeling with someone, not just for them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. It's deeper than just getting where they're coming from. It's about really getting that their experience is real for them, even if we don't totally get it.
So it's not about, like, forcing ourselves to feel exactly what they feel.
Exactly. True empathy, it respects boundaries. It's about making space for someone to feel seen, heard, not judged, even if we haven't lived their exact life.
That reminds me of the story of Jesus, weeping with Mary and Martha. He knew he'd bring Lazarus back, but he still grieved with them, experienced their pain. That always gets me.
It's powerful, right? Shows that true empathy doesn't mean having all the answers. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just be there. In their pain, their joy, whatever it is.
Makes me think about all the times I've tried to jump in and fix things instead of just listening.
We've all been there. But those are the moments we learn the most, about real empathy. It's like the excerpt says, even those little moments of connection where we choose empathy over judging, they can change things.
It makes you wonder, how do we even notice those moments more? In our own lives, I mean.
Maybe it starts with being aware of what we're telling ourselves, Like how often are we judging people, even silently, instead of trying to understand them?
Wow. When you put it like that, it makes you realize we've all got work to do, myself included. But that thing about a ripple effect, that even small acts of empathy matter, that's hopeful.
It is. Reminds us that we're not helpless when we see suffering. We always have a choice. Turn away or be there with empathy. And sometimes that choice, even if it seems small, can make all the difference.
Speaking of choices, the excerpt, it also gets into trust, especially with faith. And I gotta say, that connection, it really got to me.
It's definitely a fascinating link. The excerpt, it talks about how God never changes and how that's like a foundation for like unshakable trust. It even quotes Hebrews, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Really makes you think, about believing in something when everything else feels so uncertain.
Like, no matter what's going on, you can always find that solid ground in something bigger than us. But then the excerpt, it takes it a step further with this whole idea of like two-way empathy between people and a higher power. That's where things get super interesting to me. What does that even look like, that two-way empathy, and how does that affect trust?
Well, I think it tells us something about how faith works. It's not just about blindly trusting in something way out there. It's more like we're in a relationship, we talk to a higher power, tell them our fears, our hopes, all of it, and we open ourselves up to, getting comfort, guidance, even challenges right back.
Wow, yeah.
That vulnerability, the willingness to both talk and listen, to give and receive empathy, That's what deepens trust, don't you think?
Totally. It's not just rules. It's like nurturing this bond built on like understanding and compassion, just like any relationship, but it takes effort, right?
Yeah.
Communication from both sides.
Exactly. And like with our human relationships, those times we feel really seen by like a higher power, it's incredibly powerful. Like when you share something super personal with a friend and they just get it, no judgment, that bond of trust, it just gets stronger.
That makes a lot of sense. But it also makes me wonder, the excerpt, it talks about questioning, seeking understanding. Is there room for that in this kind of empathy with a higher power? Or does that mess with the trust we're building?
That's such a great question. And honestly, I don't think it's disruptive at all. Actually, I think the excerpt is encouraging it. Blind faith, it can be shaky. But real trust, the kind that grows over time, that can handle doubts, questions, all of it. It's like, think about your closest friends, your family. They aren't perfect. They mess up. They see things differently. But you don't stop trusting them.
Right, because you've got that foundation. Empathy, understanding, you've learned to see things from their point of view, even when you don't agree. So with faith, you're saying it's not about like turning off your brain, but about bringing your whole self, doubts and all.
Exactly. And that's where it gets exciting. That wrestling with the big stuff, searching for meaning, it's all part of it. It's in those moments when we question and search that we bump into unexpected truths.
Yeah.
We grow in ways we wouldn't have imagined.
So it's about trusting the process, even when things don't make sense, even when we doubt. We're still moving forward, still connecting.
Precisely. Embrace the mess. The uncertainty is where the good stuff happens, where we really grow and change.
That's a really cool way to look at it. It's not about having all the answers. It's about being real, flaws, questions and all, trusting that we're where we need to be.
I love that. It makes me think about all those times I tried to force things, have all the answers, And then I realized the real growth happened when I just let go, surrendered to the unknown, just trusted the process.
Me too. It's like we're always being told to loosen our grip, to just be okay with the mystery of it all. This conversation has given me so much to think about, but before we get ahead of ourselves, let's come back to those three things we've been talking about: trust, dignity, empathy. The excerpt, it puts them together almost like they depend on each other. How do you see them working together? Not just with, a higher power, but just in our daily lives.
They're totally connected, aren't they? Like, can't really have one without the others. It's like the excerpt says, they need each other to stand.
Yeah, like a three-legged stool. That's a powerful image.
It is. And it makes you think about how each leg supports the others. Like, without dignity, how can you even have empathy?
Right.
How can we really get someone else's experience if we don't see their worth in the first place? And without empathy, how do you build trust? And that goes for any relationship, right?
Right.
Friends, family, even with, something beyond us.
It's true. Like, if someone thinks I don't see them as an equal, why would they trust anything I say? It's like the excerpt says trust. It's not a one-time thing. It's like this constant choice to be empathetic, to choose dignity every time.
Exactly. And that practice, that choice to lead with empathy and dignity, it's not always easy, especially when we're dealing with people or situations that, push our buttons.
Oh, tell me about it. Like, it's
Yeah.
easy to be nice when things are good, when everyone agrees. But what about when we're hurting or mad or feel misunderstood? How do we do it then?
That's the real challenge, right? And in the excerpt, it gets that it's hard, but it gives us something to work with looking at ourselves.
Interesting.
It's like we have to check our own biases, ask ourselves the tough questions about how we see ourselves and others, because a lot of times how we treat others shows how we treat ourselves too.
It's like that saying, hurt people hurt people. Not to excuse bad behavior, but we're all carrying stuff, baggage, old wounds. And when we can be compassionate about those wounds, ours and other people's, that's where healing happens, understanding too.
It's a lifelong thing, working on that. We'll mess up. Our egos will get in the way sometimes. But what I take from the excerpt is we keep trying. We keep choosing empathy, even when it's tough. Because those small things, kindness, understanding, they matter more than we think.
I totally agree. Reminds me of this time a stranger was just so kind to me on a day I really needed it, totally changed my whole outlook, made me want to do the same for someone else. It's crazy how those little things can mean so much.
It's like that quote, I think it's Mother Teresa, not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And in this world where everything feels so overwhelming, that message that we can each make a difference with just a little love, a little kindness, that's powerful stuff.
It is, because it reminds us that we're not powerless. We don't have to wait for someone else to fix everything. We can start right now, right where we are.
Yes. By choosing to be kind, to be there for each other, to be that source of trust, of dignity. The world needs more of that. And you know what? Maybe those small acts of love, they'll spread outward, create something bigger than we can imagine.
I love that. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, got to go back to something you said earlier about how when we cultivate trust, dignity, empathy, we're not just like being better friends or whatever. We're connecting to something bigger.
Absolutely. That's what makes this conversation so amazing, right? It's not about some self-help thing. It's about something way deeper,
Yeah.
something that connects us all. Whether you call it faith, spirituality, or just believing in the good in people, these things, they're like the bridge to that connection.
Like they change how we see everything, the whole world, our place in it.
Yeah.
And we're less focused on just ourselves, more aware of how connected everything is.
It's a beautiful way to think about it. And it reminds us we're not alone in this. There's comfort in that, in knowing we're part of something bigger, something that goes beyond our differences.
That's a great note to end on. And for our listeners, if you want to go deeper on this, definitely check out the full thickshades.com excerpt. It's one of those things that stays with you. As always, we want to hear from you. What stuck with you? What questions came up for you during this deep dive? Hit us up on social media. Until next time, keep asking those big questions, keep searching, and keep diving deep with us.